Okay, picture this classic scenario. You've got the Englishman abroad, right? He's sitting in a cafe somewhere trying to order breakfast from a waiter who doesn't speak a single word of English. So what does he do? He pulls out that time-honored tactic of just repeating his order. Sausage, egg, and chips, over and over, getting progressively louder every single time. It's kind of funny to picture, but honestly, it highlights this massive, universal frustration. We've literally all been there, thinking that if we just push our message out with a little more force, the other person will magically get it. Well, welcome to this explainer because today we're going to completely flip how you think about getting your message across. So, let's start with a really important question. Who is actually responsible when communication fails? Think back to that waiter. Or, hey, let's bring it closer to home. Think about sending the exact same set of instructions in an email to your team over and over again and continuing to just get ignored or totally misunderstood. Doing the exact same thing while expecting a different response is, well, the literal definition of insanity. If you ask for something and don't get it, the harsh reality is you just didn't ask the right way. And that leads us straight to our core concept today. It's a really foundational idea in neurolinguistic programming, or NLP, and it goes like this. The meaning of communication is the response it elicits. Now, I want you to let that sink in for a second because this is a massive paradigm shift. It's a total game changer. Why? Because it places 100% of the responsibility for being understood directly on your shoulders as the communicator. It is not some 50-50 split. The success of any interaction depends entirely on how the listener receives the message, not on what you actually intended to say. To really drive this home, let's compare two totally different mindsets. First up, we have the intent-based communicator. Now, this person means well. They really do have honorable intentions. But when they are understood, they tend to blame the listener. They just repeat the message louder, hoping it'll finally stick. On the flip side, we have the response-based communicator. This person, they take responsibility. Look, if your perfectly clear, well-meaning instructions are met with defensiveness from a colleague, the actual meaning of your communication was defensiveness. Regardless of your good intentions, that was the result. The response-based communicator sees that defensiveness, accepts it as feedback, and immediately changes their approach. But you might be wondering, why do these misunderstandings even happen in the first place? Well, it boils down to another brilliant NLP principle. The map is not the territory. The truth is, none of us are actually operating in objective reality. We're all operating from our own completely subjective model of reality, our own personal map. And this map is built from our unique past experiences, our beliefs, our values, and all our emotional filters. So your perfectly clear message has to pass through their mental filters. By the time it actually reaches them, it might be completely distorted from what you originally meant. Which brings us to what we actually need to do about it. Okay, quick NLP jargon alert here. The technique is known as adopting a perceptual position. But in simple, everyday terms, it just means stepping into their shoes. If you want to communicate effectively, you absolutely cannot just shout from your own map of the world. You have to take a beat and read their map. Experiencing the situation from their perspective is the absolute essential first step to building empathy and adjusting your delivery so your message actually lands. So let's take a look at resolving conflict at home and see how this actually plays out. Take a super relatable scenario. We've got a father, Dan, and he is incredibly frustrated because his teenager, Drew, still hasn't mowed the lawn like he promised. Let's break down the NLP communication cycle here to see exactly why Dan is failing. First up, step 1. Dan sees the uncut grass. That's his internal trigger. Step 2, this immediately triggers his internal state. He's feeling anger, resentment, frustration. His internal monologue is going, "He always lets us down." Then, step 3. This boils right over into his external behavior. Dan starts ranting at Drew using this really harsh tone of voice. And finally, step 4. This sets off a chain reaction. Dan's ranting hits Drew, which becomes Drew's trigger, creating a receiver's internal response of totally shutting down, defensiveness, and sulking. The result? A complete and utter stalemate. And I can guarantee you that lawn is definitely staying unmowed. So how in the world does Dan fix this? Well, remember, the meaning of communication is the response you get. Dan is getting sulking, so clearly his communication isn't working. To break this loop, Dan has to change his internal state first. He steps into Drew's shoes for a second. He remembers his own teenage years, when he needed some actual guidance, not just someone yelling at him. That builds real empathy. And by disengaging those reactive emotions, Dan can actually change his external behavior. He modifies how he speaks to Drew, totally bypasses that wall of defensiveness, and successfully guides him to go get the mower out.
It's pretty amazing. He controlled the entire system just by changing himself.
Now, let's pivot for a second and look at adapting in the workplace. If your detailed emails or those standard operating procedures are constantly being ignored or just done incorrectly, you've really got to stop blaming the team. The response you're getting right now is confusion or maybe just apathy, which means you need to adapt to how your team naturally processes information. And there's a highly practical framework for this called representational systems, or VAK for short. Basically, everyone processes the world through their senses, but most of us have a dominant preference. You've got visual processors who literally need to see things. You've got auditory processors who need to hear things. And then you have kinesthetic processors who need to physically feel or do things. And you can usually hear their preference right in their everyday language. A visual person will say something like, "Let me show you the big picture." An auditory person says, "Let's talk it through." And a kinesthetic person will say, "Let's get a feel for this." Now, the crucial part is learning how to spot these styles in your coworkers or your clients, and it actually goes way beyond just the words they use. For instance, a visual thinker. They're going to thrive on whiteboard lists. They also tend to speak quite fast and even have shallower breathing. An auditory thinker, on the other hand, absolutely loves verbal agreement at the end of a meeting, and they usually have this resonant, really well-timed voice. And what about your kinesthetic colleagues? Well, they appreciate a solid handshake, they typically sit with a very relaxed posture, and they take much deeper, slower breaths. And this leads us to a massive tip. You've got to match their communication style. This is exactly how you hit the bullseye. Think about it. When you're rolling out a new system at work, don't just deliver some one-size-fits-all presentation. If you know a particular stakeholder is a visual thinker, throw a diagram up for them instead of just talking at them. If they're auditory, walk them through it verbally. Let those kinesthetic learners actually do it hands-on. Because when you match someone's preferred system, your message just lands instantly. It completely bypasses all their resistance and builds this really deep unconscious rapport. Which brings us to another super powerful NLP law. The person with the most flexibility within a system influences the system. See, a lot of people think that adapting to someone else's map of the world or, changing how you speak to match their specific style is somehow giving up your power. But it's actually the exact opposite. If you're rigid, you are going to be trapped in a stalemate. Flexibility is the very thing that gives you ultimate control over that communication loop, and it guarantees you actually get the final outcome you want. And that leaves us with this final thought for today's explainer. We started out by agreeing that repeating the exact same failed message over and over again is just insanity. So I'm going to challenge you. What are you going to change about how you communicate today? Are you going to stop waiting for that other person to miraculously change? Will you finally take ownership of the response you're getting, step into their map of the world, and adjust your delivery? Because remember, the true meaning of communication really is the response it elicits. It's time to take control of that response. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will see you next time.